Hello and welcome to another episode of What's the Dumbest Thing? So today I've got with me Dan. Dan, hello Dan.
Hello, Mike.
So just a little bit of housekeeping before we jump in and I do the intros. Um, if you're sat here enjoying the afternoon or morning, wherever it may be, just remember to turn your phone on silent, shut off your emails, and sit back and relax for like another, I don't know, 30 to 50 minutes, depending on how long we take. If you've got any input that you want to give us, then I'm pointing, for those of you who are listening, I'm pointing to the camera and the microphone at the moment. But we'll welcome your comments, and also if you feel that you'd like to, if you're a big Uber tech and you want to sit in the seat that Dan's got at the moment, then we'll welcome you on board. So Dan and I have known each other for many, many years, and I think Dan, you've been working. You worked in various different in banking fraternity within cybersecurity, and you've led teams there. And then you've also done a significant amount of private contract work outside of that as well, which has taken you to many interesting places. So I think you sort of intermittently sit on as an interim CTO as well, I believe. So you've got a fair range of experience. I think that's fair to say. Would you add anything to that as an intro?
Let's see. So I work in cybersecurity and have done for quite a long time. I'm also an interim CTO for several companies, normally related to doing cybersecurity things. And I also work as a commercial photographer on the side.
There you go.
Currently building a house, which is also fun.
And prior to recording, we were just talking about cameras. So there you go. Okay. Cool. So the whole point about this is talking about what's the dumbest thing. And what we've obviously realised is it's not always that people do dumb things deliberately, who would, but when you go into an organisation with an external pair of eyes, it's often the case that somebody's inadvertently not done something that they should have done. So, for instance, checking on the tab that prevents the software from or prevents hostile APs from joining wireless networks and stuff like that, or an admin, or sorry, not doing enough right quality assurance when the dev work is done, and therefore there's been an opening in the actual software that can be exploited. And it's just little things like that. But I mean, what would you say are some of the dumbest things that you've seen in your experience in terms of cyber security? And just to be clear, guys, this is not something that Dan does, and it's not something that we do at IncomeSec, and it's certainly not something that you, the listener, does. It's just from our experience. It might have happened to somebody else you might know.
Well, the most simple, really dumb thing that I still see constantly, despite it being a terrible idea and has been for a long time, is a really simple one. It's just admin users being logged in as admins all the time. So all admins know they should have a separate daily driver account with low security privileges. But it's very easy to stay logged in as your admin account all the time and do everything under the admin account. And as an IT security professional, I love that. It makes my life so much easier. So we know if we can take over any of the admin accounts in that company, we get everything. We know if we can trick a user, if we can put a device between their keyboard and their computer and grab their passwords, we know we're going to get absolutely everything. That's a very simple but common one. We see lots of fun ones as well.
What might be another example of a fun one then?
A fun one would be people very frequently ask us to do security analysis, which we do, and then off the back of it, they'll say, we don't think that's really that valid, and then they'll often challenge us to use that information to hack into their company, and we get them to sign off on something, and then we hacking, and then they often get upset. That's quite a common theme.
Fair enough. So I suppose the next question then is, what would you say are some of the bare minimum elements that any entity should be looking at in terms of their cybersecurity? So just to give you some context, some of the answers we've had is regular password refresh, multi-factor authentication, making sure your patches are up to date. What might be some of the things that you would say? And bearing in mind that we also recognise that if as an owner or decision maker within an organisation that's maybe, I don't know, 50 seats, for instance, 50 employees, that might have a very different profile to one that's got, I don't know, 1,000 plus. So I guess maybe, would your answer be different for either of those two scenarios, for instance?
My answer would be the weakest link in the chain is people, and the weakest people are the least trained people.
Right.
So when you're looking to exploit a company, or when I'm looking to exploit a company, I look at as many people in that company as I possibly can, and I'm always looking for the weakest link, and that will often be the least trained people with the highest privileges. And they're always my way into the organisation, always. And that could be the receptionist on the front desk would be a great example. They're often underpaid, undervalued, and undertrained. But they often have quite good access privileges to all sorts of things, not least access to allow people into the building, which is fantastic for us. So that's a very common person that we would approach, and it's such a common attack vector for us that we actually have written into our contracts that they can't fire people that we purposely exploit, because it wasn't really their fault, it was the organisation's fault for not training them. So that's the most common one. The other stuff, true, you should have well encrypted passwords and two-factor authentication on everything, and I think more and more we should be phasing out VPNs. I don't think traditional VPNs make a lot of sense with software-defined networking, such as Tailscale or Zero Tier. They're huge attack vectors, VPNs. Again, I love them when I'm on the red team, and I hate them when I'm on the blue team. So that'll be my answer, I think.
Right, okay. I see. And so have you come across it where you might do some form of pen test and your report signals through social engineering you were able to exploit the organisation, and that there's a vulnerability in the fact that the teams aren't trained, and yet that whole process means that an answer to that is that the organisation has to get training. We've seen it where the training has been desired to be done by an in-house trainer as opposed to an external cybersecurity expert. Given that not all cybersecurity experts are great at training, they can be quite boring by nature of the task, right? But then again, it's also the flip side of that is somebody who's good at training might not know diddly squat about cybersecurity. So what would be your kind of position on that in a scenario?
I think there's a pretty strong case for always using external trainers. I think people familiar with the organisation are going to be familiar with all the individuals in the organisation, and that creates a kind of bias, and it also creates a management issue where training someone that's way above your pay grade is quite an uncomfortable experience, I think, where an external trainer just doesn't have that bias or frankly doesn't care what someone's grade is. The training is across the board, and if anything, people that are higher up in the company need more training because they're going to have more serious access or the ability to make payments, for instance. Those people need way more training in the lower end, but they're also the least likely to desire it, and normally the hardest to actually pin down and actually do the work with. So I think that's quite difficult from an internal point of view. Although saying that, some of the organisations that I've supported have amazing internal trainers who know exactly what they're doing. They train the teams every 3 or 6 months, so they keep detailed records, but that's rare.
Right. What do you think about the various different software packages where have massive catalogues? So, for instance, you do the kind of the anti-phishing or the faux phishing kind of scenario where you ping an entity and you figure out that Bob in sales has been clicking on links and Sandra in accounts has been clicking on links and yada yada yada, and then you have to kind of give them kind of off the shelf. You can give them off the shelf training for that, or would you suggest that again specific person to person training is better? How would you view that?
I think those two things work hand in hand. I think good metrics, so having a system like that lets you get some idea of how people in your organisation are actually reacting to those kind of off-the-shelf products. That's great information to have. But I think you've got to be able to look at it holistically and work out how you're going to actually train those people and teach them not to make those errors or mistakes again. And you might want to adjust the entire system as well to prevent those mistakes from being able to be made. Right. If Sandra in accounts is clicking on links, I'd sort of question how those links ended up on her computer.
Good. I'm glad you didn't talk about Bob from sales, because it's always sales guys that get
anything
that.
But Bob.
Cool. I suppose anything else on that from your perspective you think that people ought to be aware of? Or?
In a training context, I think teaching people to be generally aware of everything that's going on. If there's someone walks into your building and you don't know who they are, you should feel comfortable questioning that person, and people don't. I mean, I walk into huge companies and just wander around the building, and people are more likely to offer me a cup of tea and let me in the server room than they are to question why I'm there. And that's a very common, especially a British kind of trait. The British are very polite,
Right.
willing to accommodate. So I think training people to be a little bit more bullish and ask people, why are you here and what are you doing? I think that's totally reasonable in a business. Less so at home.
Wow. No, yeah, we are accommodating, and we like saying sorry. We don't like asking people questions why, unless we know them really well. So some of the things that some of our customers have asked us, and people on various socials have asked different questions about to put forward here. I think it's quite a popular topic is the use of AI and some of the misunderstandings of it and the assumptions that what it may or may not do in the long term over, the next, 5 to 10 years, as opposed to what it's actually achievable today. I'd like to know what you think about that, especially, for example, if we look at, any security provider that is tagging AI onto the end of its product. It seems to me it's a little bit like, send me this pen. Well, it's got AI in it. And that kind of, it's a very popular kind of buzz terminology, but is there any actual grounds or depth to it all? And where should you be sitting there going, oh, this is really where we should be using AI, and this is how we should be using it, as opposed to, well, it's got AI written on it, so we better spend another, X amount of tens of thousands of pounds, £100,000, whatever. So yeah, your general thoughts on that.
I think AI has become this very nebulous term. I don't think many people can really define what AI is at this point. I think it means something different. It means something very different to the marketing departments, that's for sure, because they stick AI on the end of everything. And I think it all depends. And also there's a big differentiate between AI and machine learning, which people seem to have kind of merged into one thing. Using AI in IT security, I think AI is going to be the future in every industry. I don't think there's much doubt about that at this point. And the leaps and bounds that are happening month on month rather than year on year are enormous. They're vast. That being the case, how do you harness this new technology and make it applicable to all sorts of things, but IT security being one of them? And I think a great example of that is in CCTV. Using AI to image process in CCTV is incredibly powerful. It can be the eyes that look at your cameras, and you might have hundreds of cameras in a large organization. It's just not practical to have a human sat there trying to monitor all of those. And AI for security camera feeds is incredibly powerful. It's a great use. It can spot someone leaving a bag, walking away from it, and it can raise an event or raise an alert. AI can also, to some extent, filter out all of those alerts. If you have hundreds of cameras, you're going to be getting thousands of events. And that's a very fatiguing sort of process. And AI can filter that down really well. Where AI seems to be a very poor choice is our antivirus now has AI. That's just a meaningless thing. I don't understand. Antivirus has always had AI from a kind of certain perspective, and I've never seen any evidence to suggest that the new AI in antivirus is doing anything that the old one didn't do. So I think if someone says our product's got AI, I think I would ask for a very specific demonstration of where the AI is and what it's doing. And I'd be shocked if there was anything useful or meaningful in that. And if there was, I think we should buy it. It'd probably be great.
Fair enough. If they can prove the pudding, then get it. And if it's snake oil, it's snake oil.
Yeah, and I think that's, unfortunately, at the moment, just at this point of where we are, tagging AI onto absolutely everything has become the norm.
Because there's a lot of the use of stuff like SOC as a service, for instance. So you've got entities that, I'm sure banks, large enterprises, they've all got their own SOCs and they've all got their own red teams and blue teams and all the rest of it. And that happens because they've got the financial backing to be able to plough money into getting that kind of dealing with that infrastructure. And of course, the turnaround of staff, because it can be a bit of a mundane, boring job after you've got over the glitz of it. But then down the line, those organisations that want that kind of functionality but don't necessarily have the budget to put, a dozen people on the payroll just to do that task and then watch the screens all day long, then you can buy something which is an EDR, MDR, XDR, whatever letter, an acronym service there is. And then what we also see is from a kind of vendor perspective is well, that's our EDR service with AI or with machine learning, and then that's kind of sold as a SOC, as a service. But in reality, I don't think it is. Or I don't know. Am I going off piste on that one, or do you think there's money in that?
I think that there's always going to be, well, not always. Certainly at the moment, there's still a human element in all of this. Like, I think using AI is like any other tool that we use. It's great and can do certain things, but it's going to need some kind of guidance to fit into your organization. There's no set and forget AI that fits every organization. It just doesn't work that way. And I think that vendors seem to, well, the sales teams at vendors very specifically, I mean, they're there to make a budget and make a killing. And sticking the word AI on it is quite compelling. We see AI in the news every day, but it won't just do the job for you. You're going to have some kind of feedback and guidance. And if you've got repetitive tasks, I think it's amazing. And like I say, watching CCTV screens is great. Watching security events can be really, really helpful, but it isn't going to automatically solve them for you. That's going to require some kind of interaction, or, you're going to lock yourself out of all of your own systems, which I've certainly seen happen as well.
Lock yourself out of it.
So often I've seen companies that have effectively implemented not necessarily AI solutions, but similar kind of things, event-driven patches that just fix certain things when they come up. And what's happened is they've inadvertently DDoSed themselves. So a series of events will happen. Their systems will interpret that as some kind of attack, lock everything down, and now they can't get into it, and their customers can't access their websites or their systems. And it's kind of like a handgun foot shoot kind of scenario, and that's because they didn't build in something to control that kind of human aspect. Also, you have to remember that people are way more stupid than you can predict. If you build a system to be idiot-proof, you will be proven wrong very, very quickly. Someone is always going to be mashing that button just to see what it does. And that's when you're going to find those kind of problems.
I'm laughing because that sounds like me.
That does sound like you, yeah.
What does this red button do? I've done that before. Had a fast response.
Just like pour water down the back of this coffee maker.
Okay, cool. I know there's in the past there's something we've. Okay, so let me, before we go on to that, let me just tail off on this whole kind of dialogue about AI and how to implement. If you're sitting there as like a, I don't know, the IT manager or decision maker within an organization, and somebody's waving an AI flag at you, or you want to you know about it, you hear about it, and you want to implement it, how would you be careful to make a good decision, and not just follow, oh, it's got AI written on it?
I think you have to ask vendors to implement a test environment.
Right.
I think I'm shocked at the amount of people that buy products and then just install them across the board in entire companies. It's such a shockingly bad idea. And bigger companies have got the budget to build test environments with test users and check all this stuff out in advance. And it doesn't happen enough. I'm always surprised at how easily it is for, a vendor to walk into a company, sell 20,000 seats of a product, and they just blindly install it across the entire organization. And then huge problems arise. It could just be like a performance blip, but it tends to be like a big security issue, or like I say, kind of a self-DDoS attack where they lock themselves out of something important. I would say if you're going to buy something, make sure you've tested it and reviewed it over a period of time. And if the vendor isn't willing to offer you that, the product probably isn't what you want.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. It reminds me of another instance, actually, slightly different. But I mean, we had I'm not going to mention the vendor's name, but it was a DR kind of solution, and it required a box on site, and so we did we agreed with the customer to do a proof of concept, and the box was delivered. The box was configured for this limited kind of scoped environment. And the customer went, well, this is great. It's doing exactly what I want it to do. Fantastic. All right, well, let's go ahead. And so we spun up the invoice. We thumbed up with the vendor, and then they put it into their live environment. And for some reason, it wasn't integrating with VMware or something like that. And it just fell on its face completely. And despite the fact there was this constant dialogue with between the vendor and the customer was sitting there going, it just ain't working. And surely, VMware is VMware. You ought to be able to work with that, and And it wasn't until it went from a proof of concept into the live environment that they start seeing all the issues, because it had multiplied up many times. And I think that so we ended up telling them to pull it out and just ship it back to the vendor, and that'd be that. But I mean, it just pays to do your POC and make sure it all works, I suppose.
And I think you've got to have a comprehensive test environment. Like if it worked on their little test environment and it didn't scale, their test environment wasn't really sufficient, in my. Very common.
Right, fair enough. Okay, cool. Right, so I've got another question just to talk to you a little bit further. I know we've spoken about quantum, or being post-quantum threat compliant or ready. Now, I know the American outfit, was it NIST or whatever the acronym is, I can never remember. They've got a set of criteria that they're saying if you can, every organisation should follow this to enable them to be as prepared as possible or be post-quantum ready. And then I kind of look at it as like, well, you need to walk to the train station and it's going to rain. Do you take an umbrella or do you risk it? I mean, the umbrella isn't necessarily going to keep you 100% dry, but it's going to keep most of the rain off of you. Or do you just risk it and hope that the British weather will hold out long enough for you to get to the train station or not? That's how I see it.
Wow, that was a painful acronym or analogy. I'm not quite. You lost me entirely.
We'll scrub that bit out then, maybe in the edit. I don't know, or maybe we'll leave it in there just to carry on. But I mean, what are your thoughts on quantum or being post-quantum ready?
Okay, it's a big question. So, quantum computing isn't there yet. It's a way off. It's a good way off, I suspect. A bit like fusion reactors. Always 10 years away. And also, you don't really know what the capabilities of a post-quantum era are. So I think the fear is that all encryption will be instantly crackable. That's the big one. And there seem to be certain kinds of encryption which are less vulnerable to being cracked by quantum computers. But given we haven't got quantum computers, we don't actually really know that for a fact. That's just someone's guess. And I think that's what the NIST guidelines are kind of relying on. So you can be as ready as we think we're able to be at this point in time. I'm not really focusing on it, I'll be honest. I don't think those changes are going to make a sufficient difference to any company, and I don't really think that the quantum era is going to happen anytime soon. But this video will date very badly if it happens tomorrow. But the bigger issue for lots of really large organisations with a post-quantum era is one they can't solve. And that is, if you've been collecting encrypted data for a period of time, like the security services have been for many years, and then quantum computer allows you to crack that encryption, you'll have potentially a decade worth of encrypted transmissions that you can now real-time decrypt and access. And there's no real solution for that. So it's going to be a bit of a game-changing, or at least paradigm-changing world after that actually happens. So I think trying to kind of prevent your current encryption from being instantly broken is a bit like, using a cup to bail out the Titanic. It's not really gonna make a lot of difference in the scheme of things.
Yeah, because I mean, I have heard that as being one of the arguments on the dark web. Not that I've ever been there or I know what it is, but anyway, there's a ton of data that sits there. It's encrypted already, but it's already been stolen. So it's just kind of stockpiling. People are stockpiling what they've kind of taken, but they can't unencrypt it because they don't have the capacity. And then, therefore, once quantum computing happens and it's more available, then all of that data will be decrypted. So you've got, so that then means that the only way to prevent that from happening to an entity is making sure that they do all that they can to prevent the breach from happening in the first place. Because once it's out there, and once it's done and unencrypted, it's unencrypted. But you kind of don't know what's going on. So it's kind of like, how do you actually overcome that? You've got to deal with existing parameters to make yourself secure, right?
I think you should probably think about what you're going to do when all of that encrypted data gets unencrypted and leaked. I think that's probably the way to probably spend your time and resources and thought processes, because if quantum computer comes off, and it hasn't yet, and it is a long way off, I suspect, then that's going to be your concern as an entity and as a company. What have you been transmitting, and what is the cost of that becoming public knowledge? That's going to be the real cost factor. Also, I think to an extent as well, it should probably raise the question of organisations and how they actually maintain and keep on what they actually transmit over available networks like the internet. Because at the moment, everyone just trusts that their systems are bulletproof and that they'll send anything. But a lot of the time, that data doesn't need to be sent. So there needs to be probably better structures in place to figure out how we're going to communicate and why.
Right. Yeah. And that boils down to almost like a process, really, doesn't it? Do you need to be sending this information, yes or no? And then it's like if it falls within certain criteria, then it ain't leaving the building, so to speak. Right, I see. Okay, so what about then the argument within quantum land about I don't know, the Chinese having enough processing power to actually do that? I think I heard somewhere, I didn't read it or see it or hear it, but somebody quoted that some guys from IBM have publicly sat there and said, well, there's stuff out there that shouldn't be out there, ergo the Chinese have done it. I have to say the Chinese are kind of blamed for everything. And we can probably talk about DeepSeek if we've got a couple of minutes left over as well later on. Do you think that there's actually something going on already and it's just limited to a very, very few people, or is that just kind of bollocks?
Conspiracy theories are always kind of out there, aren't they? My experience of conspiracies, having been part of several, as soon as more than 10 people know, it's not a conspiracy anymore. The data always gets leaked. It's, the information of whatever it is, and then it just becomes a cover-up campaign. Regarding China, I think China's hugely underestimated. I think there's this historical kind of view of China as being this company that kind of churns out plastic junk. That's a very outdated and inaccurate kind of analysis of where they are now. They seem to be an incredibly forward-thinking nation. They invest enormously in tech, and also they invest enormously in their tech from a point of view of sharing data. They open source so many of their projects, which allows other people in China and all over the world to actually benefit from that and accelerate other projects, where the West seems to be the opposite. For instance, OpenAI is the least open company in the world. It's incredibly closed. I don't think they've ever released anything for free. There's nothing open about them. Where you look at China and you look at DeepSeek, they had all these breakthroughs and they instantly open sourced a lot. And if you look at the follow-on effect of that, there's so many other projects that have been built on the back of DeepSeek that are actually way in advance of DeepSeek. That happened relatively quickly. So DeepSeek at this point in time was a couple of months ago, 10 weeks ago. And it was incredible for its time, for the fact that they created this very small scale model that is as powerful as the best models in the world. Well, those models from other vendors now, using DeepSeek's kind of influence, they're 10 times smaller again. And we're going to get to the point very quickly where you can have the equivalent of OpenAI or current OpenAI running on your home computer, and then very quickly your phone. And I suppose if you're on a blue sky, it's going to be, your Ray-Ban glasses with a screen built in and a full AI talking in your ear. That stuff used to be sci-fi, but now it feels like it's just a matter of time. It's just a few years away. Right. It's incredible. But as for the conspiracy stuff, I'm sure there's lots of conspiracies going on around the world. I doubt the Chinese, or the one I normally hear is the Israelis. The Israelis have got quantum computers cracked.
Oh, no, I hadn't heard that. Okay, fine.
The first person to actually crack it's going to have an amazing head start, a bit like the Enigma machine in World War II. You're going to keep it quiet and just, gradually decrypt data and work with it. But you can only do it for so long before everyone gets wise to the fact that their data must be being decrypted. And then it just becomes this kind of like whodunit movie. And then, I don't know, if it's the Chinese at that point, I hope they'll open source it all, which would be good. Good for the world.
I tell you what, I read, I don't want to get political, but I read an interesting statement it was just somebody doing a thing on LinkedIn, right? Allegedly, Jimmy Carter was talking to Mr. Trump, and he was talking about the comparison about what the United States had done since 1976 or 79 or whenever it was, a kind of normalised the relation or the diplomatic relationship with China, and China's hasn't gone to war with anybody, hasn't spent that much on aggressively going out to politically kind of influence itself with its military, and has spent sort of like 300 billion on tech and
buying resources, looking at long-term views and buying resources. I think they own 90% of the copper mines in Australia. They don't, and the copper's in the ground, but they realise it's going to be needed for semiconductors at some point, so they already own it.
I mean,
I find that,
look at what they do in Africa and different infrastructure projects that they fund and build railways, and so it comes at a price, and the price is, we're benefiting your society and helping you build it, but at the same time you're going to give the mineral rights to this place to us, or whatever the arrangement is, which is significantly different than we'll give you £1 million, but you need to spend it all on Land Rovers kind of thing.
exactly.
Okay, fine, cool.
I wasn't going to get political, and then you got political, Mike.
I know, that's hard to do. Anyway, okay, cool. So we did touch on DeepSeek after all. What would be what's the thing that you mentioned that you're not actually looking at quantum? What would be the things that you're looking at the moment then? What are the trigger points for you?
I think the current short-term future where all the interesting stuff's going to happen, the space you should be looking at is AI agents. There's a project that came out 2 days ago called Manus, MANUS, which is a Chinese open-sourced AI project, which is an agent. So you give it a task, and it uses a series of AI engines and access to the web to gather data and do incredibly deep and interesting research on any given subject. And it comes back and gives you an interactive reporting front end where you can move objects around and see what affects what and how you're going to deal with it. And that's an incredible use of AI. And I think the scaling of AI is probably going to become less of an issue. So someone like OpenAI keep building bigger and bigger models that are very generalist. I think the future is probably going to be fairly small, super precise, specific AIs, and then have an agent front end that actually looks at all of those and interacts with all of those to get you the information that you require. And that seems to be happening. So if you want an area to explore, AI agents. That's the new buzzword.
Okay, that's interesting. So that kind of ties it. A friend of mine is very much into, he's a big believer of the 3-person unicorn. So obviously unicorn a business is valued over at $1 billion or more, right? And it to be just 3 people. And the reason it's to be 3 people, or one of the reasons, is that the systems and the efficiencies and the use of technology, particularly AI, will mean that 3 people could spin up a business which would have a turnaround of 100 million and therefore a valuation of $1 billion and get its unicorn status. Where you look at something like, I can't remember I think it was WhatsApp had like 50 staff when it was sold for like, I don't know, X amount of billions or whatever it was. So do you think that's actually a realistic thing that you could have just like a senior tech, a commercial guy and a financial guy that could sit there, put their heads together and build something which only takes the 3 of them to do? And yet it be that.
Absolutely. And you can do that using AI. AI is incredibly good at that. You can give it a task, have it research it, give you the information you need to get that going. And I think we're going to see that. We're going to see that over the next few years. We're going to see unthinkable pop-up companies that take the market by storm. From people that aren't particularly qualified either. They're just really, really good at using AI. And I think that's becoming more and more the thing. I don't know about you, but I use AI to rewrite everything at this point. I can lazily write down some notes and then say, take in the gist of these notes, rewrite this into a formal business document. And I'm like, it's a little bit too formal, do it again. And it kind of slightly lowers it. That's incredible. I can save days of report writing and do it in a matter of minutes now. That's a very trivial use of AI. But I think if you use agents to kind of manipulate a whole series of AIs and have them do the research for you, you can start this process before bed, wake up in the morning, and you've got a detailed, super interesting kind of business plan that's going to tell you what to do and when to do it to get you started. And that's only getting better.
But how does that work though? With how does that work with? I mean, it's clear that when you read something, I read stuff I read sometimes. I go, okay, AI bollocks. Somebody's done that with AI, and yeah, whilst the thread is there and that makes sense, it's kind of fluffed with some assumptions that there are kind of what AI thinks it should be doing or should be saying. You know.
So I would say that the things that you've read, that's a really bad AI model that's written that document for you. I think the things that you've read and you're going, wow, that's really well written. That was also probably written by AI, but it was just a really good model. So you didn't kind of put it into the category of badly AI written text. You just put it into the category of well written text, and you assumed that a human had done it. And that's
Right.
going to become more and more the thing. AI voices have become incredibly good and natural now. I'm wondering about the Indian call centres.
No, I've done that. So it's a bit of software that we use, and it cloned my voice. It's scary. It took
That's
less than a
becoming
minute.
real time voice cloning. But don't you think there's this kind of thing where I mean, certainly, like if my nan receives a phone call from an Indian voice, she's actually got to the point now she thinks it's a scam. But if she received that phone same call with the same context and same language, but it was in a beautiful, eloquent English Rose voice, she would fall for it all day long.
Mm.
Don't underestimate those scammers. They're going to be using all of this technology to improve their game, and that's going to become a whole new thing. I mean, it's a whole IT security thing anyway. The fact that I can clone your voice mic and then make phone calls to people in your voice.
I know, and it scares me. Seriously does.
No, being able to wield the power that you have, it's just
I wish I might use it myself if I was that much. But anyway, okay, cool. Any last thoughts?
you can cut that bit.
Yeah. Well, look. Um, so a couple of things.
Where's sunscreen? Go on. I'm going to make you edit the whole end of this video by just constantly about.
Thank you. I think that bit. And now you can be putting more work into me for doing the editing on this. So what we're going to do, so likes and subscribes and all that kind of good stuff. You can do that by clicking on the links, which will magically appear somewhere on the screen. And then if you're interested in reading a newsletter, that will also pop on the screen somewhere, I guess, I hope. And if you do have any questions or you want to place any comments, then do please punch them in. And also, if you're a tech guru that wants to sit in Dan's seat and give it the what for, then do please let us know. But that's the ending our episode for today. And it's been a pleasure as ever having a chat. Thank you very much. We'll talk soon.